Serena Vaughn said it without even lowering her champagne glass. "She'll come back by morning. They always do." The words floated easily through the penthouse, light and careless, as if she were commenting on the weather instead of my life. The Manhattan skyline glittered behind her through floor-to-ceiling windows, 1,000 lights reflecting off glass and steel, all of it cold, distant, untouchable. Marcus Hale stood beside her, one arm loose around her waist, the other holding his drink like a trophy. He didn't correct her. He didn't hesitate. He smiled. That smile was the moment something inside me finally broke. Not loudly, not dramatically. There was no screaming, no shattered glass, no scene worthy of gossip blogs. Just a quiet click, like a door locking from the inside. I stood there with my coat still on, my overnight bag resting by my feet, realizing that in their story, I was already finished, reduced to a prediction, a pattern, a woman who would fold by morning. Serena's eyes flicked toward me, sharp and satisfied. She had the look of someone who'd won something she hadn't paid for. The silk of her dress caught the light as she shifted, perfectly at home in the space I once helped choose, the space I once believed was ours. Marcus didn't look at me at all. He was already done. Already certain. That certainty hurt more than the betrayal. I waited. Not for permission, but for something human. An apology, a pause, a flicker of doubt. None came. The city hummed outside, taxis crawling along the avenues below like veins carrying blood that didn't belong to me anymore. Somewhere far beneath us, life went on, indifferent to the quiet end of mine. Serena laughed softly, leaning closer to Marcus. "I'll set the coffee for early," she said, as if I were a bad habit he'd shake after a night's sleep. "She'll realize she doesn't have anywhere else to go." Anywhere else. The words pressed into me harder than a slap, because part of me feared she might be right. My job was gone. My savings were thin. My name, once respected in quiet boardrooms, had become inconvenient. Walking away didn't feel brave. It felt reckless, dangerous, like stepping into traffic and hoping the cars would stop, but standing there, watching them rehearse my return like a foregone conclusion, something else surfaced. Not strength, not confidence, just exhaustion. A bone-deep weariness of shrinking myself to survive rooms like this, of being valuable only when I stayed silent, agreeable, replaceable. I picked up my bag. The sound was small, but it cut through the room. Marcus finally looked at me then, his expression unreadable, already distant. Serena's smile tightened, just for a second. "Don't be dramatic," Marcus said calmly. "Get some rest. We'll talk in the morning." Morning. They thought morning belonged to them. I walked to the door without answering. The handle was cool under my palm. For a brief, terrifying moment, I imagined turning back, apologizing for making things uncomfortable, letting their version of the future swallow me whole. Instead, I opened the door and stepped out. Behind me, Serena's voice followed, soft and amused. "See? I told you. She'll be back." The elevator doors closed, and for the first time, I didn't know if I would survive what came next. But I knew one thing with absolute clarity. I wasn't going back. The elevator ride down felt longer than it should have, like the building itself was testing my resolve. Each floor number lit up briefly, then vanished, counting away the life I used to recognize. I stared at my reflection in the brushed steel walls. My face looked calm, almost detached, which scared me more than tears would have. Shock does that. It wraps you in something numb so you don't fall apart too fast. When the doors opened to the lobby, the air changed. Cooler, public, unforgiving. The doorman glanced up, recognition flashing in his eyes before professionalism snapped back into place. He'd seen me here 100 times, usually beside Marcus, usually smiling. Tonight, I was alone, carrying one worn bag and the weight of a future I hadn't planned for. Outside, the city swallowed me whole. Traffic roared past, horns sharp and impatient. The sidewalk pulsed with people who had somewhere to be, someone waiting, a reason to keep moving. I stepped aside near the curb, gripping the strap of my bag, suddenly aware of how exposed I was. No car waiting, no apartment key in my pocket, just my phone, my ID, and a bank balance that would make any reasonable person panic. I checked my account anyway. Old habit. The number stared back at me, smaller than I wanted to admit, smaller than it should have been after years of work I never got credit for. My throat tightened. Serena's voice echoed in my head. She doesn't have anywhere else to go. For the first time that night, doubt crept in. I thought about calling someone. Anyone. A friend I hadn't spoken to in months, a former colleague who might still answer out of pity, even Marcus. Especially Marcus. The idea repulsed me and tempted me at the same time. That was the most dangerous part. Not the money, not the uncertainty, the pull to return just to stop the fear. I started walking. Each step felt deliberate, heavier than the last. I didn't know where I was going, only that standing still would break me. Storefront lights blurred as I passed. Laughter spilled out of a bar. A couple argued softly near a crosswalk. Life, ordinary and cruel, went on. By the time I reached the subway entrance, my legs were shaking. I paused at the top of the stairs, city air filling my lungs, and made myself a promise I wasn't sure I could keep. I had left with nothing, but I wasn't going back to be nothing. The room I ended up in barely deserved to be called a room. It was a sublet someone had posted online at midnight. Cash only, no questions. A narrow bed, a desk with a wobbling leg, a single window that looked straight into the brick wall of the next building. It smelled faintly of old detergent and something burned long ago. Still, it had a lock, and that was enough. I sat on the edge of the bed and finally let my shoulders drop. Silence pressed in, thick and unfamiliar. No hum of expensive appliances, no distant city view curated like a painting. Just the low buzz of a flickering ceiling light and my own breathing, uneven and too loud. I pulled my phone from my coat pocket and stared at the screen. One missed call. None. My chest tightened at the emptiness. This was the part Serena hadn't seen, the part Marcus had never waited for. The hours after the door closed, when confidence drains away and survival takes its place. I opened my messages without meaning to. Marcus's name sat there, familiar and dangerous. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I could already hear what I'd say. Something reasonable, something small. I just need a few days. We should talk. I didn't mean to leave like that. The words formed easily, too easily. I typed them out, line by line, my pulse quickening with every letter. The message glowed back at me, a lifeline and a leash at the same time. If I sent it, the fear would stop. The uncertainty would soften. I'd have a bed, a plan, a role again. I wouldn't have to face the morning alone. My thumb hovered over send, and then another thought slipped in, quiet but sharp. Morning. I pictured Serena pouring coffee in my kitchen, already rehearsing her victory. I imagined Marcus glancing at his phone, not with relief, but with satisfaction. Proof that they were right. Proof that I always folded. My stomach twisted. I deleted the message, watched the text disappear letter by letter, like erasing a version of myself I was done being. My hands shook after, the adrenaline crashing hard. I set the phone face down on the desk as if it could still betray me. Lying back on the bed, I stared at the ceiling until my eyes burned. Sleep came in fragments, shallow and uneasy. Each time I drifted off, I dreamed of turning back, of standing in that penthouse again, smaller than before. When morning finally crept in through the thin window, gray and unkind, I was still there, and I hadn't gone back. Morning didn't arrive with clarity or relief. It crept in quietly, pale light leaking through the narrow window like it was unsure whether it was welcome. I woke with my phone still face down on the desk, exactly where I'd left it, untouched and silent. No missed calls, no messages. That somehow hurt more than if there had been 10. I sat up slowly, my body heavy, my mind already racing ahead to problems I couldn't afford to solve all at once. Rent, work, pride, survival. I reached for my laptop, an old one I'd kept out of habit, its surface scratched from years of being shoved into bags and under desks. It felt like another relic of a version of me Marcus had outgrown. The screen flickered to life. Out of instinct more than intention, I opened an old folder labeled Archive. I hadn't touched it in months, maybe longer. Inside were drafts, notes, analyses I'd built during the years I worked beside Marcus, ideas that had been praised in private and dismissed in meetings. Too cautious, too early, too inconvenient. I scrolled without focus until one file stopped me cold. A risk assessment. I remembered that night clearly. I'd stayed up late refining it, mapping out vulnerabilities in a planned expansion Marcus was excited about. Regulatory pressure, over-leveraged partners, a timing issue that could turn fatal if the market shifted even slightly. He'd skimmed it, sighed, and told me I worried too much. The deal went forward. My file went nowhere. I hovered over the delete key. Keeping it felt pointless. What good was being right after everything had already gone wrong? It was easier to erase the past, to let the proof of my voice disappear along with the life I'd lost. My finger pressed down halfway, then froze. I stopped, not because of hope, but because of anger. A slow, unfamiliar kind. Not the explosive rage that burns out quickly, but something steadier, something that asked a simple question. What if this mattered? Not to Marcus, not to Serena, but to me. What if the version of myself who stayed up late, who saw what others ignored, wasn't wrong at all? I opened the file. As I read, my pulse quickened. The logic still held. More than that, the risks I'd outlined were already beginning to surface. Small indicators buried in news I'd skimmed without connecting the dots. My breath caught. This wasn't nostalgia, this was relevance. I saved the file in a new folder and closed the laptop carefully, like it was something fragile. For the first time since leaving, I felt a shift. Tiny, but real. They thought I had nothing. They were wrong. Marcus woke to sunlight spilling across the penthouse bedroom, sharp and unapologetic. For a brief, disoriented moment, he expected to hear movement. The familiar sounds of morning routines, the low clink of a mug, the soft hum of someone else breathing in the room. Instead, there was nothing, just stillness, heavy and intrusive. He checked his phone before he even sat up. No messages. That was unexpected, but not alarming. Yet. He told himself Evelyn was doing what she always did when emotions ran high, walking things off, sulking, waiting for the fear to settle. She'd be back. Serena had said so with such confidence that it felt foolish to doubt it. Patterns existed for a reason. People reverted to them when pressed. In the kitchen, Serena moved easily through the space, already dressed, already comfortable. She poured coffee as if she'd always belonged there, setting one mug down in front of him without asking. "Relax," she said lightly, noticing his glance at the phone. "She's just making a point." Marcus nodded, but his attention drifted. He checked his email instead. A calendar reminder blinked on his screen. An early call with a junior partner. Another notification followed, then another. Questions. Delays, one meeting rescheduled without explanation, annoying but manageable. He ignored the faint tightening in his chest. Serena leaned against the counter, scrolling through her own phone, smiling at something he couldn't see. "You know," she added, "by noon she'll realize how expensive pride is." That word stuck with him. Pride. Marcus took a sip of coffee and frowned. It tasted wrong, too strong. Or maybe he was imagining it. He glanced at the doorway, half expecting Evelyn to appear, already apologizing, already shrinking the moment down to something survivable. The image felt reassuring, necessary. By mid-morning, the silence became harder to dismiss. Still no message, no missed call, just absence, clean and deliberate. His phone lay face up on the counter like an accusation. Marcus checked it again, then again, irritation creeping in. Evelyn wasn't supposed to do this. She wasn't supposed to disappear. Maybe you should text her, Serena suggested too casually. Marcus bristled. She knows where I am. He sent a short message anyway. Neutral, controlled. We should talk. The screen showed it delivered, not read. For the first time, doubt edged in, thin but sharp. Not about losing her, about something worse. What if she wasn't waiting at all? By noon, the penthouse felt quieter than it ever had, and somewhere beneath his confidence, something shifted, just enough to make him uneasy. By early afternoon, the city felt heavier, not louder or crueler, just indifferent in a way that pressed down on my chest. I sat in a corner of a small cafe, nursing a cup of coffee I'd already let go cold, watching people come and go with purpose. Laptops opened, meetings planned, lives in motion. Mine felt paused, suspended between what I'd left and what I couldn't yet see. I checked my email on my phone, knowing I shouldn't. 3 rejections waited for me, lined up neatly, polite and final. We've decided to move forward with other candidates. At this time, we're looking for someone with a different profile. Translation was unnecessary. I was a complication, a risk, an uncomfortable reminder of office politics no one wanted to inherit. My stomach tightened. The coffee churned uselessly inside me. I did the math again, slow and careful. Rent for the sublet, food, transportation, a few weeks, maybe a month, if nothing went wrong. The numbers didn't bend. They never did. Panic crept in, quiet but relentless, whispering all the things Serena had said out loud. That pride was expensive, that walking away had consequences I couldn't afford. I excused myself to the restroom and stared at my reflection under unforgiving fluorescent lights. I looked older than I had a week ago, not dramatically, but enough that I noticed. Lines around my eyes, tension I couldn't shake. I pressed my palms to the sink, grounding myself, fighting the sudden urge to cry. This was the moment they never saw, not the exit, not the silence, but the aftermath. The part where you wonder if you've mistaken stubbornness for strength, where the idea of going back starts to feel less like defeat and more like relief. I pulled my phone out again, Marcus's name still there, still familiar. I imagined typing just one sentence. Can we talk? Nothing more, nothing humiliating. My hands shook. I put the phone away and left the cafe without finishing the coffee. Outside, the air was sharp, autumn edging in early. I walked without direction, letting the movement burn off some of the fear. By the time I reached a quiet park bench, my legs ached. I sat, shoulders slumping, finally letting the weight settle. This was it, the point where things could still go either way. I was tired, scared, closer to the edge than I wanted to admit. And still, somehow, I stayed. I didn't go back to the sublet right away. Instead, I walked until my feet hurt, until the thoughts in my head slowed enough to line up. When I finally sat down at a public library, the kind no one notices anymore, it felt like admitting defeat and choosing survival at the same time. I found an empty desk near a window, pulled out my laptop, and opened it without knowing exactly why. The familiar whir of the fan steadied me. I clicked through folders the way people flip through old photographs when they don't want to think too hard. Documents from years ago, notes, drafts, work I'd done late at night while Marcus slept, while he told people I was supportive and nothing more. My cursor paused over a folder labeled Old Projects. I hadn't opened it since before everything fell apart. Most of it was outdated, ideas that belonged to a different version of the world. I was about to close it when one file name caught my eye, a risk analysis I'd written months before Marcus pushed through his biggest expansion deal. I remembered the argument clearly. I'd warned him about overexposure, about one partner who looked solid on paper but wasn't. He'd smiled, kissed my forehead, and told me I was being cautious again. I opened the file. As I read, my pulse quickened. The logic was clean, the assumptions reasonable. More unsettling than that, the early warning signs I'd flagged were now showing up in real time. A regulatory delay here, a funding hiccup there. Small things, the kind executives dismissed until they stacked too high to ignore. My throat went dry. I hadn't been wrong. I'd just been inconvenient. For a moment, the urge to delete everything surged back. Erasing the proof would be easier than carrying it. Proof meant responsibility. It meant possibility. And possibility meant risk. I hovered over the delete key, my finger trembling slightly, the weight of the last 24 hours pressing down hard. Then I thought of Serena's voice. They always come back. I saved the file instead, copied it, backed it up twice, hands moving with a certainty I hadn't felt in days. It wasn't a plan yet. It wasn't revenge. But it was something solid, something real, something that belonged to me. I closed the laptop and leaned back, exhaling slowly. For the first time since I walked out of that penthouse, the fear loosened its grip just enough to let something else in. Not hope, resolve. Julian Reed noticed the name before he noticed the numbers. It appeared near the bottom of a forwarded report, almost as an afterthought, attached to a risk memo his junior analyst had flagged that morning. The memo itself wasn't remarkable. Solid work, clean structure. What caught Julian's attention was the signature at the end. Evelyn Cross. He leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking softly beneath him, eyes narrowing as memory surfaced. It had been years, 6, maybe 7. A tense negotiation in a glass-walled conference room where everyone talked over each other, desperate to be heard, except one woman. She'd spoken last quietly, laying out a scenario no one else had considered. She'd saved him millions that day, then disappeared into the background, swallowed by louder men and shinier titles. Julian picked up his phone and checked the timestamp on the file. It wasn't new. It had been written months ago. Ignored. That alone told him more than the content. Insight like this didn't get dismissed by accident. It got dismissed because it made the wrong people uncomfortable. He opened a market feed on his second screen. Small movements, minor delays. Nothing the headlines cared about yet, but the pattern matched, almost perfectly. Julian felt a slow, familiar spark of interest ignite, not excitement, recognition. Across town, in a quiet library, Evelyn had no idea any of this was happening. Julian scrolled back to the top of the document, reading more carefully now. The language was measured. No ego, no theatrics. Just logic, foresight, the kind of thinking firms paid fortunes for and rarely listened to when it mattered. He glanced at the company name tied to the analysis and let out a short breath. So that was how it had ended up there. He tapped his pen against the desk once, then twice, considering his next move. He didn't rush. He never did. People made mistakes when they rushed, especially when they thought they were winning. He sent a short message to his assistant, calm and precise. Find Evelyn Cross. Confirm availability. No context. Julian stood and walked toward the window, Manhattan stretching below him in neat, ruthless lines. He wasn't interested in revenge, or drama, or rescuing anyone. He was interested in alignment, in people who saw the world as it was, not as they wished it to be. Behind him, his phone buzzed softly. "She's in the city," his assistant replied, recently unattached. Julian allowed himself a faint smile. Sometimes the most valuable assets were the ones everyone else thought were expendable. Serena Vaughn had always known how to read a room. It was her advantage, the thing that let her move faster than other people, step into spaces before they realized she didn't belong there. That morning, standing in Marcus's penthouse with a silk robe draped casually around her shoulders, she sensed something was off. Not panic, not yet, just a thin current of irritation beneath Marcus's calm. He moved through the apartment with clipped efficiency, phone in hand, answering messages without his usual charm. His attention kept drifting, eyes narrowing at his screen, jaw tightening for reasons he didn't explain. Serena watched him over the rim of her coffee cup, filing the details away. Confidence had taught her that silence was rarely accidental. "She still hasn't replied?" Serena asked lightly, already knowing the answer. Marcus didn't look up. "She will." The certainty in his voice sounded practiced, rehearsed. Serena smiled, but the satisfaction she'd felt the night before didn't return. Evelyn was supposed to be predictable. That was the whole point. Women like her always came back once reality hit. Bills, loneliness, fear. Serena had built entire relationships on that assumption, yet something gnawed at her. By late morning, Marcus's phone rang twice with calls he didn't take. He paced once, then stopped, scrolling through emails with a frown that didn't soften when Serena touched his arm. She withdrew her hand slowly, studying him now with sharper eyes. "Is something wrong at work?" she asked. Marcus exhaled. "Nothing serious." But Serena had learned that nothing serious often meant something I don't want to explain. She returned to the kitchen island, pretending to check her phone while she watched his reflection in the dark glass of the windows. He looked distracted, not heartbroken, not guilty. Distracted in the way men were when control slipped through their fingers. The realization unsettled her. Evelyn wasn't crying on a friend's couch. She wasn't calling. She wasn't begging. The silence wasn't emotional. It was deliberate. Serena felt the first crack of doubt open inside her, thin but unmistakable. By noon, she was the one checking her phone too often, scanning social feeds, searching for signs of collapse. There were none. No vague posts, no dramatic quotes, nothing. "That's strange," Serena murmured to herself. She had expected to feel victorious. Instead, a quiet unease settled in her chest. Evelyn hadn't reacted the way women were supposed to. She hadn't played her role. And for the first time since stepping into Marcus's life, Serena wondered if she'd mistaken the prize. Because the woman she thought she'd replaced hadn't lost. She'd vanished. And that was far more dangerous. The phone rang while I was packing up my laptop, the sound sharp in the quiet corner of the library. I almost ignored it. Unknown number. New York area code. My first instinct was suspicion. Creditors, recruiters fishing, someone calling to tell me no one needed me after all. I stared at the screen until it stopped, my chest tight with the familiar reflex to brace for disappointment. Then it rang again. I answered this time, my voice cautious. "Hello?" There was a pause on the other end, not awkward, deliberate. "Evelyn Cross," a man said calmly, not asking, stating. "This is Julian Reed." The name hit me sideways. I knew it. Everyone in my world knew it, even if they pretended not to. Investor. Quiet power. The kind of man whose presence was felt more than announced. I straightened instinctively, fingers tightening around the edge of the desk. "I don't think you have the right number," I said carefully. A soft breath, almost a smile. "You wrote a risk assessment on Hale's expansion last spring. Page 7 outlined a regulatory choke point no one else saw. You were right." The room seemed to tilt slightly. I swallowed. "That memo wasn't public." "No," Julian agreed. "It wasn't supposed to be." My mind raced. Had Marcus shown it? Had someone leaked it? 100 possibilities collided, none of them comforting. "Why are you calling me?" I asked, forcing steadiness into my voice. "Because timing matters," Julian replied, "and because you're currently available." The word stung more than it should have. Available sounded like disposable, like I was something picked up after someone else dropped me. I took a breath, grounding myself. "If this is about Marcus, I'm not interested." "It's not," Julian said simply. "It's about you." Silence stretched between us, heavy and charged. I glanced around the library, suddenly aware of how small my world had become in the last 24 hours. One phone call, one conversation. Everything felt fragile. "I'd like to buy you coffee," Julian continued. "Nothing formal, no promises, just a conversation." I hesitated. This was the moment, the kind that looked harmless and rewrote lives quietly. Part of me wanted to say no, to protect myself from hope dressed as opportunity. Another part, the one that had saved that file instead of deleting it, leaned forward. "When?" I asked. "This afternoon," he said, "if that works." I closed my eyes briefly, then nodded, even though he couldn't see it. "Send me the address." After the call ended, I sat there for a long moment, heart pounding, hands trembling slightly. Outside, the city moved on, unaware that something had shifted. They thought I was waiting. They were wrong. The cafe Julian chose wasn't impressive at first glance. No marble floors, no polished crowd trying to be seen. Just clean lines, quiet music, and large windows that let the afternoon light do the work. That alone unsettled me. Power usually announced itself louder. Julian Reed was already there when I arrived, seated near the window, jacket folded neatly beside him. He stood when he saw me, not rushed, not rehearsed, taller than I expected, calm in a way that made the room feel steadier just by contrast. "Thank you for coming," he said, extending a hand. I shook it, noting the firm grip, the brief eye contact. No appraisal, no condescension. That too felt unfamiliar. We sat, ordered coffee, and for a moment said nothing. He let the silence stretch, which told me more about him than any resume could. "You look surprised," he said finally. "I am," I admitted. "I didn't expect to hear from you, or anyone, really." Julian nodded. That's usually when the right conversations happen. He didn't waste time flattering me. No speeches about potential or resilience. He pulled out a tablet and slid it across the table, turning the screen so I could see. My file. The risk assessment. Annotated, highlighted, taken seriously. "You saw what others didn't," he said, "and you were ignored because it was inconvenient." I felt something loosen in my chest. Validation is dangerous when you're vulnerable. It can feel like oxygen or like bait. I stayed cautious. Being right doesn't help much after the fact. "It does if the fact hasn't finished unfolding," Julian replied. He explained then, methodically, what I'd sensed but hadn't fully pieced together. The expansion Marcus had pushed through was wobbling. Quietly. The kind of instability that didn't make headlines until it was too late to stop. Julian's firm was watching, waiting. "I'm not offering you revenge," he said, as if reading my thoughts. "I'm offering you relevance." I studied him across the table. "And what do you get?" A faint smile. "I don't invest in ideas. I invest in people who see patterns early." The weight of the last 2 days pressed in on me then. The fear, the doubt, the almost texts. I thought of Serena's certainty, Marcus's confidence, and how small they'd made me feel. I met Julian's gaze. "What would you need from me?" He didn't hesitate. "Your honesty and your spine." I nodded slowly. For the first time since I left that penthouse, the ground beneath me felt solid. Marcus felt it first in the margins, not in headlines or panicked calls, but in the subtle shifts executives learn to fear. A delayed response from legal, a meeting that lost its urgency, an email from a lender that suddenly sounded careful instead of enthusiastic. By late afternoon, the confidence he'd woken up with had thinned into irritation, then hardened into something closer to unease. He stood alone in his office. Manhattan spread beneath him in sharp lines and reflective glass, refreshing his inbox for the 3rd time in 10 minutes. Serena had left earlier, claiming a client meeting, but he'd noticed the way she avoided his eyes. The apartment had felt different after that, quieter, less certain. His phone buzzed, a partner he trusted, voice low and clipped. "We have a situation." Marcus closed the door. "Define situation." "2 investors are asking questions we can't answer cleanly. Someone's been rerunning the risk models." Marcus's jaw tightened. "Based on what?" There was a pause, just long enough. An internal analysis, an old one. The room seemed to tilt. "That's not possible." "It is," the partner replied, "and it's accurate." After the call ended, Marcus stared at the dark glass of the window, his reflection staring back harder than he liked. His mind raced, assembling pieces he didn't want to see fitting together. Evelyn's silence, the delay, the timing. A memory surfaced of her standing in the kitchen months ago, explaining a scenario he'd dismissed with a smile. He'd been wrong. Worse, someone else knew it. By early evening, a meeting was scheduled for the next morning. Mandatory, quiet, no assistants, no press. The kind of meeting that decided futures without witnesses. Marcus loosened his tie, the fabric suddenly suffocating. This wasn't how collapse was supposed to feel. There were no alarms, no shouting, just the slow realization that the ground beneath him wasn't solid anymore. He checked his phone again. Still, nothing from Evelyn. Across town, Serena stared at her own screen, watching messages go unanswered, connections cooling with alarming speed. She'd built her career on momentum, on staying attached to rising stars. This didn't feel like rising. It felt like standing on a fault line, waiting for the tremor to become an earthquake. Neither of them said her name out loud, but both of them were thinking it. And somewhere between nightfall and morning, they would understand the truth too late. Evelyn hadn't walked away empty-handed. She'd walked away with leverage. Serena realized she was in trouble when people stopped calling her back. Not dramatically, not all at once, just small delays that stacked too neatly to ignore. A luxury brand postponed a meeting she'd already confirmed. A former contact replied with a polite, distant message instead of their usual enthusiasm. One by one, doors didn't slam shut. They simply failed to open. She sat in the back of a rideshare, city lights streaking past the window, refreshing her inbox like it might change its mind. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. She'd aligned herself carefully, strategically. Marcus Hale was meant to be a launch pad, not a liability. Power flowed toward momentum, and momentum was already shifting away from him. By the time the car stopped, Serena had made her decision. She would leave first. In her apartment, she moved quickly, heels kicked off, jacket tossed aside, phone pressed to her ear. She dialed a contact she hadn't spoken to in months, someone who dealt in information more than loyalty. When he answered, his voice was cool. "I need to move something," Serena said, discreetly. There was a pause. "Everyone needs that today." She swallowed her irritation. "I have access. Internal. It could be useful." "Is it clean?" he asked. "It's real," she replied, "and it's early." That used to be enough. "Send me a sample," he said. "I'll see." Serena hung up and opened her laptop, fingers flying, heart racing. She pulled documents she didn't fully understand but knew were sensitive. Emails, projections, fragments of conversations overheard and half remembered. She packaged them carefully, rehearsing the story she'd sell along with them. She wasn't betraying anyone, she told herself. She was surviving. The reply came faster than she expected. A single line. "I can't touch this." Her chest tightened. She typed back immediately. Why not? The response took longer this time. Someone already has it. Someone with credibility. Serena stared at the screen, the words blurring slightly. Credibility. The one thing she'd never needed before. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a missed call from Marcus. She ignored it. Whatever he had to say wouldn't help her now. For the first time in years, Serena felt the ground give way beneath her feet. She wasn't ahead of the collapse. She was trapped inside it. And the woman she'd dismissed as predictable had somehow moved faster, quieter, and cleaner than she ever could. Serena closed the laptop slowly, a sinking realization settling in. She hadn't won. She'd been outplayed. Evelyn didn't feel victorious. Not yet. The morning after her meeting with Julian, she woke before her alarm in the narrow sublet room, light leaking in through the thin curtains. For the first time since she'd left the penthouse, her chest didn't tighten immediately. The fear was still there, but it had shifted. It no longer pressed on her throat. It waited, quieter now, like it was unsure of its place. Her phone buzzed. Marcus's name lit up the screen. She stared at it longer than she meant to, the familiar pull tugging at old instincts. This was the moment he would finally sound uncertain, apologetic maybe, or angry. Either way, he would expect her to respond. He always had. The idea of ignoring him felt unnatural, like skipping a step in a routine her body had memorized. She didn't answer. Instead, she swung her legs off the bed and stood, grounding herself in the simple reality of the room. The scuffed floor, the chipped desk, the single chair she'd dragged closer to the window to catch the light. This space wasn't impressive, but it was hers. No expectations, no audience, no role to perform. Her phone buzzed again. A message this time. "We need to talk. This is getting complicated." Evelyn exhaled slowly. Complicated for him meant consequences. For her, it meant clarity. She opened her laptop, reread the notes Julian had sent over, and reviewed the timeline he'd laid out. It wasn't glamorous work, no dramatic reveals, just preparation, quiet leverage. The kind of progress that didn't announce itself until it was irreversible. She typed out a response to Marcus. 3 sentences, neutral, controlled, professional. "I'm unavailable. Please direct any further communication through counsel." She stared at the message, then sent it before doubt could creep back in. The relief surprised her. It wasn't joy. It wasn't triumph. It was something steadier, the feeling of choosing herself without needing permission or validation. For the first time, she wasn't reacting to what Marcus or Serena did. She was acting on her own terms. Later that afternoon, Julian's assistant emailed her a formal agreement. Clear boundaries, clear expectations, no grand promises, just an opportunity to do the work she was good at, with people who listened. Evelyn signed it without ceremony. Outside, the city moved as it always did, unaware of the quiet decision that had just altered the balance. Somewhere across town, Marcus was scrambling. Serena was recalculating. Systems they'd trusted were shifting without them. Evelyn closed her laptop and allowed herself a small, private smile. She hadn't chosen revenge. She'd chosen herself, and that was far more dangerous. The meeting lasted less than an hour. That was the part Marcus would remember most later, when he tried to understand how everything he'd built could be reduced so quickly. No shouting, no slammed doors, just a long table, a few carefully chosen words, and the quiet finality of decisions already made before he entered the room. The boardroom felt colder than usual, not physically, but socially. Seats that once leaned toward him now held their distance. Eyes avoided his, not out of shame, but out of calculation. People protecting themselves. He recognized the look. He'd worn it before, on the other side of the table. The lead partner spoke first, voice even, almost regretful. "Given recent findings, we've decided to restructure leadership effective immediately." Marcus didn't interrupt. He knew better than to beg for clarity that wouldn't come. He listened as terms were outlined. Temporary removal, internal review. Authority transferred until further notice. Each phrase landed softly and cut deeply. He signed the paperwork with a steady hand. By the time he stepped back into the elevator, the firm no longer felt like his. It felt borrowed, like a space he'd overstayed. The ride down was silent, his reflection staring back at him from polished steel, unfamiliar in its restraint. For the first time in years, there was nothing to do, no call to make, no lever to pull. Outside, the city didn't notice. No reporters, no headlines, no dramatic exit. Just a man walking out of a building he used to command, his phone heavier in his pocket than it had ever been. He considered calling Serena, then stopped. He already knew how that conversation would go, if she answered at all. Across town, Evelyn was in a small conference room, reviewing numbers that made sense, the kind that followed logic instead of ego. She spoke calmly, confidently, her insights landing exactly where they needed to. No one questioned her presence. No one asked her to soften her language. When the call ended, she closed her notebook and exhaled, unaware of the exact moment Marcus stepped into the street. That night, he sat alone in the penthouse, the silence louder than ever, The view was the same, the furniture unchanged, but something essential was gone. Control, certainty, the belief that he was untouchable. He checked his phone one last time, still nothing from Evelyn, and for the first time, he understood. The fall hadn't been loud because it didn't need to be. It was already complete. Marcus waited until nightfall before calling. He told himself it was strategy, not hesitation. That emotions settled after dark. That people were more reasonable when the city quieted down. The truth was simpler. He needed time to rehearse a version of himself that still sounded in control. When Evelyn's number finally rang, his heart thudded harder than he expected. She answered on the third ring. "Evelyn," he said, keeping his voice even. "Thank you for picking up." "I have 5 minutes," she replied calmly. The distance in her tone startled him. Not anger, not bitterness. Professional detachment. He pressed forward. "Things have escalated quickly," he began. "There are misunderstandings. I think if we sat down—" "There aren't misunderstandings," Evelyn said. "There are consequences." Marcus exhaled sharply. "You don't understand the pressure I was under, the expectations. Everyone was watching. I made choices I thought were necessary." Necessary. The word hung between them, familiar and hollow. Evelyn leaned back in her chair, staring out at the city lights through the window of her small rented office. "You made choices because you could," she said. "That's different." Silence stretched. Marcus felt it slipping. He changed tactics. "I'm sorry," he said finally. The words tasted strange. "For how things ended. For underestimating you." It was the closest he'd ever come to admitting fault. Evelyn closed her eyes briefly. She believed him. That was the most painful part. She believed he was sorry now when it hurt him, but apology without timing was just another form of self-preservation. "I accept that you're sorry," she said, "but that doesn't change anything." His voice tightened. "We built things together." "Yes," she replied softly, "and then you built without me." Marcus searched for something sharper, something that would pull her back into orbit. "You don't have to do this alone," he said. "We could find a way forward, together." Evelyn glanced at the clock. 1 minute left. "I'm not alone," she said. "That was the assumption that cost you?" He swallowed. "Is this it then?" "It was it the moment you thought I'd come back," she answered. When the call ended, Marcus stared at his phone, the screen dark and unresponsive. The penthouse felt cavernous, every surface reflecting his failure back at him. Across town, Evelyn stood by the window for a moment longer, then turned off the light. The apology had come. It just hadn't changed the ending. Serena's fall didn't come with drama. No public humiliation, no explosive confrontation. Just a steady, unmistakable cooling that spread through her world until there was nowhere left to stand. It began with the silence. Emails went unanswered longer than usual. Invitations stopped arriving. A brand she'd worked with for years replied to her proposal with a polite note thanking her for her time and wishing her luck elsewhere. Luck. The word felt like a dismissal dressed up as kindness. Serena reread the message twice, then a third time as if the meaning might soften. It didn't. She told herself it was temporary, that markets shifted, networks tightened, and patience was part of the game. But patience had never been her strength. Momentum was, and momentum was gone. The connections she'd relied on had quietly reoriented themselves, aligning with safer names, cleaner reputations. People didn't cut her off out of loyalty to Marcus. They cut her off to protect themselves. One afternoon, she walked into a familiar office building without an appointment, relying on recognition to carry her through. The receptionist smiled politely and asked her to wait. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Finally, a junior associate emerged, apologetic and firm. "They're unavailable," he said. "I'll walk you out." The words landed harder than any insult. Outside, Serena stood on the sidewalk longer than necessary, phone in hand, scrolling through contacts she wasn't sure she should call anymore. She considered reaching out to Marcus, then stopped. He was no longer an asset. He was a liability. Worse, he was a reminder of a gamble that hadn't paid off. At home, she opened her laptop and searched her own name, a habit she'd perfected over years of careful self-curation. The results were still clean. No scandals, no exposés. But there was nothing new either. No buzz. No relevance. In her world, invisibility was its own kind of failure. For the first time, Serena wondered if she'd mistaken proximity to power for power itself. She thought of Evelyn then, uninvited and unwelcome, the woman she'd dismissed as predictable, as temporary. Serena had assumed she understood the rules better, that she could move faster, detach cleaner, win sharper. But Evelyn hadn't played the same game. Serena closed the laptop slowly, a quiet dread settling in. This wasn't a setback she could charm her way out of. This was consequence, earned, delayed, and finally unavoidable. She hadn't been punished. She'd simply been removed. Evelyn's reward didn't arrive as applause. There was no announcement, no congratulatory emails flooding her inbox, no sudden shift that screamed success. Instead, it came quietly, the way real stability often does, in the rhythm of her days changing without her noticing at first, in the way her shoulders no longer tensed when her phone rang, in the fact that she slept through the night without waking up to check messages that never came. Her new routine settled in fast. Mornings began early, coffee brewed in a small but sunlit kitchen that belonged entirely to her. No one else's schedule to orbit, no moods to manage. She reviewed reports with a clarity she hadn't felt in years, her mind sharp and unburdened by the constant need to prove she deserved a seat at the table. When she spoke now, people listened, not out of politeness, out of respect. The first time a senior executive paused mid-meeting to say, "Let's hear Evelyn's take," something inside her shifted. It wasn't pride, it was recognition. Julian kept his distance in a way she appreciated. He didn't hover or mentor or rescue. He trusted her. That trust felt heavier than praise and far more valuable. When they disagreed, it was clean, professional, honest, no games, no power plays disguised as concern. Late one afternoon, after a long session that ended with clear decisions and aligned goals, Julian walked with her toward the elevator. "You're doing exactly what I thought you would," he said. "And what's that?" Evelyn asked. "Standing your ground without needing to announce it," he replied. She smiled, small and genuine. Outside, the city looked different now, not softer, just clearer. She passed storefronts without flinching, crossed streets without feeling chased by her own thoughts. The fear that once followed her like a shadow had thinned into memory. That night, alone in her apartment, she unpacked the last box she'd been avoiding. At the bottom was an old notebook from her years with Marcus, half filled, ideas abandoned when she stopped believing they mattered. She flipped through it slowly, then placed it on her desk instead of shoving it away. She hadn't just survived. She'd reclaimed something essential, her voice, her agency, the quiet confidence that came from knowing she could lose everything and still choose herself. The reward wasn't a man or a title or a victory over someone else. It was waking up each day unafraid of her own decisions, and that was worth more than anything they'd ever taken from her. Regret didn't hit Marcus all at once. It arrived in pieces, scattered through ordinary moments he used to take for granted, standing in line for coffee where the barista no longer knew his name, opening his calendar and seeing more empty space than obligations, walking past conference rooms that once went silent when he entered, now filled with meetings he wasn't invited to attend. The penthouse still looked the same furniture, same view, same carefully curated sense of success, but it no longer felt like proof of anything. It felt like a museum to a version of himself that no longer existed. At night, the silence pressed in from every corner, louder than any argument he and Evelyn had ever had. He replayed conversations he'd dismissed, her voice calm and precise, warning him about risks he'd brushed aside. He remembered the way she used to pause before speaking, as if choosing the exact right words mattered. At the time, he'd mistaken that for hesitation. Now he understood it for what it was: discipline. Marcus sat at his desk one evening, scrolling through old emails he'd never bothered to reread. Her name appeared everywhere: suggestions, analyses, follow-ups, each one marked with a quiet professionalism he'd relied on without acknowledging. He closed his eyes, a tightness settling behind them. Across the city, Evelyn walked home through streets washed in late evening light. She moved easily now, her steps unhurried, her thoughts no longer tangled in second-guessing. She passed reflections of herself in darkened windows and barely recognized the woman who used to flinch at her own image. That woman had carried fear like a second skin. This one carried resolve. Marcus, meanwhile, checked his phone out of habit, not expectation. No new messages. He considered typing her name into a draft, then stopped. There was nothing left to say that hadn't already been said too late. Regret, he realized, wasn't dramatic. It didn't beg or scream. It simply stayed, a quiet companion to every decision that followed. Evelyn reached her building and paused for a moment before going inside, looking up at the sky framed by steel and glass. She felt something close to gratitude, not for what she'd lost, but for what she'd learned it was possible to keep. They were no longer connected by anger or love or even memory, only by contrast. Marcus remained where he was, surrounded by reminders of a power that had slipped through his fingers. Evelyn moved forward, unburdened, her life expanding in ways he would never witness. That was what regret really looked like. Morning arrived softly without ceremony. Sunlight filtered through the windows of Evelyn's apartment, warm and steady, the kind that didn't demand attention but changed everything it touched. She stood in the kitchen, barefoot on cool tile, pouring coffee and listening to the quiet hum of a city waking up. There was no rush in her movements, no knot of dread in her chest, just space. Her phone buzzed once on the counter, a message from Julian. Breakfast later? No agenda. She smiled, not because of the invitation itself, but because of how it felt: easy, equal. There was no chase, no imbalance, no unspoken debt. Over the past weeks, something natural had grown between them, built on respect and shared clarity. He admired her mind. She trusted his consistency. Neither of them needed the other to be complete, and that was exactly why it worked. Across town, Marcus woke to the same morning and felt none of it. He sat at the edge of his bed, staring at a phone that no longer brought answers. Overnight emails had confirmed what he already knew. The restructuring was permanent. The firm would move on without him. The world had adjusted faster than his pride could keep up. Serena hadn't called. He hadn't expected her to. Everyone had made their calculations. He thought, not for the first time, of that night. The confidence, the laughter, the certainty that Evelyn would return because she had nowhere else to go. He understood now how wrong that assumption had been. She hadn't needed to destroy him. She'd simply stepped aside and let his own choices do the work. Evelyn, meanwhile, buttoned her coat and stepped out into the day. When she met Julian at a quiet cafe, there was no tension, no performance. They talked about work, about books, about places they still wanted to see. At one point, he reached across the table and took her hand, not as a claim, but as an invitation. She didn't pull away. Later, walking home together, he asked softly, "Would you consider building something real, not just professionally?" Evelyn didn't answer right away. She thought of who she'd been and who she'd become. Then she nodded. "Yes," she said, "on my terms." That was the ending no one else saw coming. Marcus lost the illusion of control. Serena lost her relevance. They got exactly what their choices earned. Evelyn gained something far rarer, a life where she was chosen, respected, and free. And that morning, finally, they understood. She was never coming back. So the story comes to an end here. And if you're still with us at this moment, really still here, then something in this story has touched you in a quiet, personal way. Maybe you didn't just watch Evelyn's journey. Maybe you recognized a part of yourself in it. The doubt, the fear, the moment when walking away felt more dangerous than staying. And yet, this story reminds us of something the Stoics have taught for centuries. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Evelyn didn't win because she controlled others. She won because she reclaimed control over herself. Life doesn't always reward us immediately for doing the right thing. Sometimes it tests us first. It strips away comfort, validation, and certainty to see whether we still stand by our values when no one is watching. As Epictetus said, first say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do. Healing begins the moment we stop begging for permission to be respected. If this story resonated with you, if it made you pause, reflect, or feel less alone, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who might need it, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us keep telling stories that heal, empower, and remind us all of our quiet strength.